Hi, my name is Shane Liberty. I'm here to go over basic tech preparation for a race day with us, 2 Trackdays Mini Moto Alliance. We're going to go over the basics of what you'll need to do for your bike to get it ready to pass tech and get your race sticker on the front of your bike. First and foremost, it's mini racing. It's not the bigger bike racing. Little more lenient on what you need, but the basic idea is we want to retain fluids on your bike and try to prevent important bolts from backing out, from vibration, crashing, what have you. The things you're going to need the most are RTV, safety wire, and safety wire pliers. First and foremost, we like to get RTV on the adjusters for the rear axle. We like to get a little dollop of RTV on the axle nut itself. Mine actually has a tension washer on the nut from Honda, so it's very unlikely to back up, but it doesn't hurt to put a little RTV on there. Your chain, if you have a clip link, you're going to need to get RTV on the master link, the clip itself. Not both sides, just the clip link itself so that it doesn't want to back out. You don't need a lot, because if you put a large clump of that on there, it's just going to get wiped off as it's spinning around the bike anyway. Just enough to make it stay in place. And then also with these master links too, ideally you want to have the opening to the link facing back this way. So as it travels around, it's less likely to pop off as the tire's spinning. Going into the engine, this motor has a separate transmission oil and engine oil, so I've got a filler on both sides. So you're going to want to have RTV or safety wire for the cap, for the filler. Make sure it's tight before you start making it permanent or semi-permanent. You're going to want RTV on this one, specifically the bolts that are helping to retain oil behind this little filter. You can always tell if a bolt is retaining some kind of fluid by seeing a copper washer behind the bolt. That's a pretty good indicator. It's keeping something from dripping out of the engine. So I've got a little dollop on each of these. This has a retention washer for the front sprocket instead of a bolt holding the sprocket into place. So for this one, you got 2 bolts. Those are tight, washers in place, a little dollop of RTV there just to help remind me that I've gone over this. This is actually really helpful too if you think about it. If you look at a stock engine, car, bike, anything, from time to time you'll see bolts that have a little paint pen mark on them from the actual facility they're manufactured. That's to help people as it's going down the assembly line. They put a mark on there to show that something's been tightened to torque spec. So this, the RTV, once you get in the habit of it, this is another way to remind yourself that, all right, I've already tightened that down, good to go. It's got RTV on it, so it should be tight. Right? I told you before you start RTVing a safety wire, you want to check your controls, but tech will also do the same thing. So they're going to be checking your shift lever to make sure it's not loose, rear brake lever, make sure that actually forces the rear brake to stop, rear wheel to stop, and brake pads to squeeze. They're going to come here and they're going to check your fuel line to make sure it's not leaking. They're going to look for a catch can. Our catch can for this bike, this little guy right here, you're going to want to take your overflows from your carburetor for oil lines. If there's any breather tubes that have the potential to spill out if you crash, you're going to run those into this location. You can have a coolant overflow hose go in here too, but I personally do not like to do that. The reason for that is if you do have coolant flooding into where the oil is, you're going to have a milkshake mess, and I prefer to keep those separate. So for me, my overflow is actually attached to the radiator on the other side. I've got 2 separate cans. One thing you got to be very careful with when you're doing this work, on the carburetor, you have hoses for float bowl and overflow, but you also have vent hoses. A lot of guys, they're tempted to run all the hoses into the can. Avoid running your vent hoses into the catch can. The reason for that is those sometimes have negative pressure, or they are actually under vacuum, heavy vacuum, and they can suck fuel, oil, whatever's in the catch can. They can suck it back into the carburetor, and your bike will start running really rich or shut off. You'll have tuning issues. You won't be sure why. That's going to probably be because you have a vent hose sucking fuel into that vent line. This is pretty common on KX65s. Those guys, myself included, I've owned 4 of those, raced them, love them. That they're very sensitive on the carb, any 2-stroke really. So you want to make sure that vent can breathe fresh and clean. Okay, coming to the fronts, RTV once again. Again, these could also be safety wire, but RTV for the banjo bolt to the casting for the brake caliper. RTV on the caliper bolts. And since this is a big brake, I've got RTV for the bolts for the bracket holding the caliper. Again, all of this can be safety wire, and I recommend you do use safety wire. But if you don't have the means to drill out your bolt holes, RTV is your best friend. Okay, coming to the front of the bike, you're not going to see a lot of RTV here. It's only for holding brake fluid that I'll be using it, and for tech inspection. So you're going to have RTV from the banjo bolt to the casting for the front brake master. Your cables and controls here for tech inspection, they're just going to make sure that everything appears to be in good order. So you're just going to make sure that if you have a control that it's adjusted properly, nothing's loose. Routing doesn't seem odd. One good thing to check is actually that your throttle is not sticking. That's a pretty important one. So let's say you put something back together and you forgot to route the cable right. You want to make sure that even if you turn the bars to full lock, your throttle snaps back. So definitely make sure that is happening before you come into tech. If this sticks open, that's a pretty big hazard, and you're going to have to get that adjusted before you get your sticker. Like I said, brake master's here. If you have bark guards like I do, we'll check to make sure they're not loose. Front, I'm going to check your kill switch. You definitely have to have a kill switch on any bike that you race. That's okay. Coming over to the right side of the bike, I have RTV on my axle adjuster. You don't need it on this side of the axle because you have it on the actual nut side. That's the part you're most concerned with. I have some RTV here on my banjo bolt for the rear brake caliper. I want to make sure that that runs from the bolt down to the actual casting for the caliper itself. That's just, again, all of this RTV is just for vibration, okay? If you have that thing not even finger tight, you're going to have bigger problems. If it was already loose and leaking before you put RTV on there, the RTV is not going to help you. So remember, these are just a secondary mean of helping make sure that you've got something at least tight enough to won't rattle out. Over here on my rear reservoir, I've got some RTV on the bolts holding the cap down. Again on the banjo bolt from the casting up to the bolt. I even have a little RTV here on the adjuster nut for this guy because these have a tendency to kind of rattle loose, and then you may have some fluctuating rear brake control. The bolt for my Kickstarter, I keep a little RTV on there just in case. I didn't have it fully tight, but typically I do. This is the other filler cap that I've got. So I've got RTV on that guy. This one I don't have safety wired at the moment, but I will in the future. I've just been a little lazy on that. It's kind of my fault. That's also why RTV is so great. Water pump down here, copper washer. These bolts, I have a little RTV on there for GP, but this is not necessary. It's only necessary for this guy right here. Simple things to check: make sure your gas cap's not leaking. You can have your vent hose, make sure that's routed correctly. We're going to go around the bike and just make sure that nothing looks loose. So this bike has a kick lever, so I'm going to check my kick lever, make sure that works. I'm going to check the bodywork real quick, make sure nothing's somewhat loose. Maybe you had a crash, you had to put things back together. I'm just going to go over it and make sure it looks like it's been well sorted out. Once we have that figured out and we're good, we'll go ahead and give you your sticker for whatever races you've registered, and you're done. Anytime you want to come talk to one of the Mini Moto Alliance and Two-Wheel Trackdays techs, feel free to come speak to us before you bring us the bike. We can go over any concerns you have. Maybe you've got some kind of special situation, you're not sure how to make it safe. Come ask us, we'll discuss it, we'll see what we can do to help you out. Okay, this is just to make sure that when you get on track, whether you're practicing, qualifying, or racing, we want to make sure you have a good time and the bike doesn't have a major mechanical, and that you stay safe anytime you're on track. Don't forget to like and subscribe!